Good evening. Great to be back in Bangalore and in BIC, and thank you all so much for your presence here. Am I audible? Uh, I value very much my brief stints in Bangalore, and the friendships that I made are more solid than the period of time that I spent here. And it's nice to be back with BIC. Um, you know, we can talk about this book, but I have attended many book launches. I've done 19 myself. And they can get quite boring because the author gets self-obsessed with his own book, his or her own book, and they start reading passages and this and that, which is an indulgence that the audience allows them. But I'm not going to seek your indulgence in that respect. I want to talk around the book. And maybe Hrishi will take a slightly different approach, but that doesn't matter. And what I want to do in 20 minutes is to take you on a helicopter ride of the field which is covered in the book. And I want to do this through stuff that is not in the book. So that's the value add. If you read the book, you may not find some of the stuff that I'm saying, but you'll understand the context. And my purpose here is to specify or explain to you the context. The invitation card designed ingeniously by Viju and his team here talks of Cornelius Vanderbilt, and one of our esteemed guests here said, "Is it the autobiography of Cornelius Vanderbilt?" And I said, "I have not yet reached that stage of being of historicity." But the context, there's a reference to that, there are about 10-15 lines. And Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was called Commander Vanderbilt, established a massive empire, $100 million in the 1880s, by using steamships to do coastal trading. He was the Adani of America of those days. In this respect, I don't know what else he did. And when he was dying, before he died, he made a massive house, which I went and saw 2 years ago. And I said, how can a guy live in a house like this? I won't sleep. It has got artifacts, it's like a museum. But I suppose he made that kind of money, and in those days the land was not so expensive. And I enjoyed the afternoon watching Colonel come. And I said, what happened to the Vanderbilts? I have not seen them since then. I don't hear of Vanderbilts. And then, of course, I read the sad story written by his great-grandson, or grandson, of how it all got whittled away. Now, that's not the only story of wealth getting whittled away. But what is interesting is what Cornelius Vanderbilt said about his making money and what William Vanderbilt, his son, said about of inheriting money. And in particular, this startup city where people seem to make billions in a few hours and lose billions in the next few hours, this message may be of some relevance. Cornelius Vanderbilt said, any fool can make a fortune. Any fool can make a fortune, even if he's been to IIM. But it takes brains to hold it. He almost flipped it the other way around. That making money is easier than holding money. And look what his son said 25 years later, William. He said, inherited wealth is a real handicap to happiness. In my case, it left me with nothing to hope for. This is the seesaw that confronts those of us who are chasing wealth. And it's a common thing that happens. You can mention many Indian families also. I start with this partly because it's on the invitation, but also partly because, well, what happened to Mr. Vanderbilt? Why did the money get... Now, there are a number of reasons, and it's not the intention here to say why do people make money and lose money. That is not the subject of the discussion. But one of the reasons was the Vanderbilt family failed to embrace the future. The sons carried on with steamship going around to various ports, and of course steam was getting phased out. Oil was coming in, the nature of the engines and the motors, the nature of the ports were changing. Along with that, various other discrepancies or deviations in their own lifestyle contributed. They missed the future. And that's the reason why that particular reference appears in this book. And I found it to be a very, the idea of this book crystallized in my mind around then. Because I had been motivated through various other factors to look at why empires get formed and rise and fall. And one book by Paul Kennedy, which many of you might have read, The Rise and Fall of Empires. I'm not a student of history, so I'm an amateur. This point about the Mughal Empire, the Ming Dynasty, the Ottoman Empire, the Roman, and so on and so forth, you can apply to anybody else. And from that I crystallized why empires rise and fall. And I found something very common in business empires and as well as in dynasties. The rise is rapid, the fall is slow and painful. It's an asymmetrical parabola for those who are inclined geometrically. And the question for me was, why does that happen? Why does it rise so fast and why does it decay so slowly? All this period that we have seen in history, you've seen technology, you've seen wars, you've seen famine, societal changes. But the rise is swift because of the 5 vowels. A, E, I, O, U. A for ambition, E for energy, I for innovation, O for an outward lookingness, a mindset, and U is unrelenting. And this city, with its youngsters, demonstrates this very, very clearly in the startup world, where there is a display of raw ambition, energy, innovation, outward lookingness, and unrelenting. Then why does it peak and decline? The opposite happens. You become indolent, you become conservative, and you become, above all, inward looking. In a management jargon, you would say you become complacent. Now, all of us have worked in companies, or many of us. We all have been citizens of nations. We know that this happens. One follows the other, sure enough, as night follows the day. So I said, why are we all so obsessed with the pace of change? Because you can't go to a CII meeting or any other forum and not be reminded that AI is coming, LLM is coming, and everything is going to change, jobs are going to go. And I started looking, I found a book by an Oxford historian called Ian Mortimer. And if anybody is interested, I would commend you to read these 2 books. It's called Centuries of Change. He did something very interesting. He took the 10 centuries between 1000 and 2000 AD. And he said, what were the major changes of technology and society that happened in each century? So there's our 10 chapters, one for each century. And then he wraps it up at the end by saying, in which century was the change highest? Which century do you think won the prize for the century of greatest change? Just take a shot at it. 1800? 18th century. And any others? Sorry? See, most of us would consider the current period to be the period of fastest change. The short answer is, it is not the century of fastest change. Some say 18th, some say 17th, some say 16th. And Ian Mortimer concludes his book by saying, it all depends on how you look at it. And this caused me to ask myself whether the tension due to the approaching change itself is causing us distress and worry, mental stress. You see all those health things that are also coming. Or is it our adaptiveness to the change? And then, in my own crude way, I don't pretend any great academic perfection in what I did. I plotted how technology has increased its pace. There's no doubt it's exponential. I plotted the tools to cope with that. That also came out to be exponential. So they are parallel. They are both going this way. And the gap is constant. So when we get worked up about the pace of change, we must always remember that it's the gap that we have to address. It's like a batsman who doesn't look for where the fielders are, but where the gaps are. And you can get obsessed with where the fielder is standing, but at least people like Ricky Ponting will tell you it's the gap that I look for and I use. In this regard, nature is a very good teacher. Because management books or books by economists or futurologists have a pattern in them. Nature is something that has been around. If human beings were not adaptive, we would not be sitting here. We would have been wiped out like the dinosaurs. So we are adaptive. We must understand that. You take some realities that we know for sure. The earth is revolving at 1,000 miles per hour. In Tamil we say it's like a bambaram, it's going around it. But none of us knows it. We think tomorrow will be like today. Which way this bambaram will topple, we don't know. But we don't think about it even. Nature tells you that competition is what drives adaptation. Absence of competition is bad because it doesn't drive adaptation. And you see this in nature, in all the African, my friend Alex Abraham has come back from the African wilds as part of his career. He went and saw this. And you can see that the gazelle that doesn't have to outrun the leopard, it has to just outrun the next gazelle, and its life is safe. So competition is a good thing. We've seen it in the public area in recent weeks as well. The third thing is, we think bigness and largeness is very important. That's why everybody wants to be a decacorn, a unicorn, a soonicorn. But actually, nature tells you that the most adaptive survive. The virus and the microbes have long outlived the dinosaur. So why do you chase size as a very important factor of power? Our own philosophy says keep your mind still, keep your body moving. But how do we lead our lives? Rather sedentary. We keep our body still and keep our mind moving by listening to election news and OTT and so on and so forth. So adaptation has to be continual. It cannot be episodic. It's like your human body. The cells that are in my body and your body today were not the cells that were, 50 years ago, 20 years ago. They are constantly renewing. Now, this is all motherhood and apple pie. This book is not about telling you something you don't know. It only reinforces what you know. It's like a book by Acharya Baba Ramdev on how to breathe better. You read it and you say, what's new about it? But you don't practice it. I mean, it's hell of a hassle, no? Getting up every morning and doing whatever Baba Ramdev tells you to do. And for the few weeks that you do it with discipline, you will tell all your neighbors, I am now doing yoga. I do 10 minutes of pranayam. But you ask the same guy after 6 months and he says, it's getting a bit under the skin, so I've stopped doing it. And that is the problem that we are addressing in this book. In this whole point about change, the key factor is to be able to observe the prodromals. I had to throw in one or two words which look complicated because then otherwise you'll give no value to the book. It's always nice to have one or two words like that. A prodromal is an advance warning, a signal. This comes from medicine. And what are the advanced signals that you're getting? And that's how a doctor diagnoses. Pramila is here and she will confirm that that's how doctors, they'll ask you all your symptoms and then put 2 and 2 together and arrive at 4 or 4.5 or whatever. We get prodromals all the time. But we don't know which is true and which is untrue, which is real and which is false. And we don't know, and it's too complicated to interpret it, so we leave it aside. But as you grow older, there's a transformation that happens to your intelligence, which those who got a little bit of grey hair will recognize, but those with only black hair will dismiss. And this is studies of psychology. When you're young, say till the age of 40, 45, 50, your intelligence is purely fluid. And if you can imagine sugar being put into milk or water and constantly being stirred, new experiences get put into the water of our brain and they're constantly stirred. And the brain gets richer and richer with sugar in that case and experiences in this case. But it's still fluid. As your old chemistry lesson from school will tell you, at some stage it gets supersaturated. And that's the age of 50. When suddenly the ability to absorb more sugar reduces, but the crystallization of the sugar begins. And that's how you get crystal intelligence. When you crossed a certain age, your past experiences crystallize into insights. So there's a place in this world for oldies. Since I don't find too many black hairs here, it's something comforting to share. And that becomes very important in formulation of strategy. Nowadays, everybody says you must get more women, you must get more people of other castes, you must get younger people. I think those are all good things from a social point of view. But you do need a few greybeards around the room because we need crystallized intelligence to be able to look at the future. Nobody can predict the future. And I emphasize these points because that's a role that we play naturally in our families and our society. All of us, whether our grandchildren listen to us or not, we try to advise them and they may dismiss you and saying, you oldies don't know. That happens in companies also. But in the field of enterprise, these are two different worlds. And there is no bridge between them. You got people like Clayton Christensen, Michael Porter, Richard Rumelt, who will write about the intellectual part of making strategy, which is very important. And you'll have people like Jerry Porras and Jim Collins writing about the behavioral part. But when we face a real situation in real life, both have to be done together. And so at the risk of making a pompous statement, which I will ask Hrishi to defend, we think this is one of the very few books, if not the only book, which combines both. It brings left hand and right hand together. And Hrishi was more inclined towards the intellectual part, and I was very inclined to the human part. And we said instead of arguing, which is more important, why don't we just say that the world is becoming an and world? You need to be firm and empathetic. You need to be decisive and yet listening. So why can't we say you need both? And that's how this book came about. Although there are two parts to the book, we have taken joint responsibility and we've tried to make it seamless. And when you look at your career path, you realize those who got crystallized intelligence and those who don't agree with me don't yet have crystallized intelligence. So that's the sort of formula. You get hired in a company for your IQ. You advance in the company for your EQ. You have to get along with people and make teams. But you lead a company for your AQ. And those who are doing IQ and EQ work at the AQ level of their lives end up not being remembered for long. And AQ stands for adaptability quotient. Intelligence quotient we all know. Emotional quotient, Daniel Goleman has supersaturated our brains. But AQ, Hrishi and I take a little credit for, to say that we are now seeding that into the discourse. How do you adapt? And what causes some people to adapt and some not to adapt? I mean, you find CEOs who are micromanaging their whole department. You find CEOs who want to know daily sales in some region. And these are not uncommon. I have had people come and ask me, my boss, my CEO of my family managed business, he runs the whole operation. I can't do anything without, etc., etc. And those are all the symptoms of it. When you want to embrace the future, sometimes it is under a pressure. Sometimes it's because you are accustomed yourself, you become AQ orientated and you do it yourself. And I want to close with a little story before I request Hrishi to talk about his. How many of you have been into a jacuzzi? Any time in the last 10 years? Just raise your hands. Not too many. Well, you should. It's a lovely experience to go to a jacuzzi. And you see, how did the jacuzzi come into our lives? There were 7 Italian brothers. Mr. Andre Jacuzzi, Mr. whatever Jacuzzi. And around 1900, they migrated to the United States, to California. they were very good mechanics. So their brain, their fluid intelligence was saying, you people are very good with your hands and bending metal. So what did they do when they came to California? Imagine the early 1900s, Wright brothers had just flown a plane. So they started making machining parts. Automotive industry was rising. They had their eyes on the future. Automotive industry was rising. Airplane industry was rising. And they became fantastic part makers. And Jacuzzi and Company was established in 1908, a very successful, what we would call MSME engineering company. One of the Jacuzzi brothers was very fond of racing and cars. He died somewhere in the 20s. And the family was distraught, very distraught. And the family said, we'll give up this business. It's a response anybody could have. They were influenced by the past. And then they were looking, what do you do? Because Italian families can be quite large. And then the child of one of the brothers got some disease, some affliction. Took him to the doctor, who said, come to me regularly and I'll put you into a tub and give you hydrotherapy. It was a big technology in those days. And the Jacuzzi brother, that brother said, looking into the future, if my son has got this affliction, other people could get it. Can I not use my engineering knowledge to put some pumps together and blow air? And that is the origin of jacuzzis, which we all today go and pay 800 rupees, 1000 rupees, 2000 rupees to have a shot at. And I'm illustrating this to say how you can embrace the future, lest I give the impression that this embracing the future is to do with corporates. I just want to close by saying it is in every aspect of our lives. Parents have to learn to embrace the future. They can't raise their children like their parents raised them. NGOs have to embrace the future because they can't just go around asking for money. And I think sitting in this audience we have Adirat, is he there? I can't see him. He's sitting in the corner there. So I've just read a fascinating book written by Adirat Sethi of something that's happening right here in Bangalore, which some of you might have heard of, but very few might have visited, called Agastya International. And in his very well-written book, which is too expensive to buy, so he gifted it to me, but he's doing something about getting it to be a less expensive book. All the points that Hrishi has written in the book, first, they said we must have a core purpose. Many people ask me, is this purpose business exaggerated? The core purpose of Agastya International is to rekindle curiosity in children. As simple as that, huh? Then they went through 5 steps, and those 5 steps, without reading our book, he's a Boston Consulting, London School of Economics product, so he's at least as smart as all of us. They set a very ambitious target. They've had a mindset change and influence other people to change their minds. And when Hrishi talks about this, you'll see he will talk about companies, but it happens in the NGO sector as well. Then they studied what are the societal changes going on in and around that village where they got the land. What are the technological changes going around? And what are the business system changes that they had to embrace? And the work is now 25 years, they are still at it. So it takes a long time before you are able to embrace the future and see the result. Just like it's a long time, producing the child is the easiest part. Raising the child and making them contented and happy is the tough part. And the same thing applies to embracing the future. And in our book, we have talked about the behavioral side, which we have together authored, but I have written lastly, and the intellectual side or the analytical side. And lest you think that it's all about behavior, I would now request Hrishi, who's unfortunately not been well, but well enough to come and meet us, and he looks well. And Hrishi, over to you.
It's an honor for me to be able to speak to such a distinguished audience. Unfortunately, I must apologize once more. I have not been well and was unable to travel to Bangalore. But Viju was kind enough, and he and his team set up a screen for me so that though I cannot see you, you are able to see me, and thank you so much for that. Gopal and I have been together and at it for many, many years, more than 55 years. But we have collaborated just in the last 2 years to put some of our thinking together. And while today he has taken a helicopter view of what is around our book, I'm going to talk a little more in terms of the specifics in our book and the principles and the thought processes on which the book has been written. So first and foremost, a little bit about the core theme of the book, which is about the soft science of business transformation. I think soft science is easy to understand, but it has to be combined in today's world, and Gopal has explained that there is a mind and there is a heart, and unless they go in synchrony, unless they are put together, sometimes the outputs do not come to the desired level. But I want to spend a minute on the word transformation or the idea of transformation, because transformation is getting a little bit of a very loose word in the English language now, or in the business scene. Transformation as a word is being sort of somewhat loosely used. We often hear about organizational transformation. We also hear about digital transformation and so on. And what is happening is that a lot of the means to an end is actually thought of and implemented as an end by itself. And that is the error of using transformation loosely. So in Gopal and my terminology, business transformation means only one thing. And it's the business activity or a product or a service which makes a real difference to the life of your customer. Transformation takes place only when someone outside the business, and lots of them outside the business, say that something has happened which has not only touched our lives, but made a huge difference to our lives. And the easy example that I can give you just now is what we are doing just now. You know, the Zoom as a service is transformative, because 10 years ago, if I came to this country and I had to go and talk somewhere, it would be virtually impossible to do what we are doing today. Now, how did Zoom emerge is a story, but COVID played a big part in it. But really, there are many, many such examples of how people can see some patterns that would help them to construct a business into the future. And to demonstrate that, I want you, if you can, to go back a little more, a few years into the past. Just imagine that we are not in 2024, but in 2015. And then imagine that we are not in 2015, but we are now in the year 2000, at the start of the millennium. And all of us in the audience likely to have been around in 2000 as people who were working, thinking, playing. And then think forward now to 2024 or 2025. And now you can start seeing the future that you did not see in the year 2000. Because so many things have happened that just did not exist in the year 2000. Take, for example, where shall we start? Let's start with the online marketplace, which we use every day. Even sitting here as a sick person, I had 2 packages from Amazon delivered to me at my club where I'm living. This did not exist in the year 2000 because Jeff Bezos started this business and online selling became a big business. Today, believe it or not, it's a $6 trillion business that did not exist just 25 years ago. And there are 3.4 billion people who are engaging in a year in dealing with this online marketplace. And this did not exist. But there are other examples. Take ride sharing. So many of us use our telephones, our phones, and get a car in front of your home, and you can come to BIC and attend this particular thing. So Uber and similar names, not similar names, but similar service has become so big, it has touched so many lives that 1.5 billion users use Uber-like service all over the world today. So these are examples of things that have happened over the last 25 years. And then there are numerous such big examples like mobile payments, which India in some way is a sort of capital, along with diabetes, because I'm going to give you a story about diabetes later on. We have two big global capitals here. But making mobile payments did not exist till 2008, I think, when PayPal, which incidentally also was the same person who later went and did Tesla, is a $60 billion market today. So if people say that we cannot see the future, we are fearful of the future, we are fearful of, it's an unknown, it's a domain for astrologers and palmists and so on, then Gopal and I want to disabuse you of that manner of thinking. Because not only is this an enormous opportunity for people who are able to focus on how to deal with the future, it's also a major graveyard. It's a major, major threat for companies who do not think or plan or spend time on the future. Because the threat is so existential that 52% of Fortune 500 companies have gone bankrupt, been acquired, or ceased to exist. And think of names like IBM or General Electric, Motorola, JCPenney, Kodak. These were names from the past that was very much part of our lives. And today they are either not there or they are sick companies, and something didn't happen to them that happened to Apple or to Amazon or to Uber and all these people. So this is what we must start thinking about, and this is what Gopal and I are trying to communicate, that it is not only a very significant opportunity, it's also a major threat. And you got to therefore spend time around it. Lest you people think that we are going into a fantasy world into the future, both of us want to emphasize and re-emphasize that it is not an exchange from doing present to the past, present to the future rather. It is not an exchange. You have to do both. And there is no doubt in anyone's mind, and both of us 100% endorse that present must come first. Because if you cannot manage today, if you cannot deal with today, then you are not going to have a future anyway to deal with. So thinking about the future, present, and doing it well is vital. And the better you do it, the better it is going to be for the organization that you are leaving behind. And Gopal mentioned about why do people, about children and grandchildren, and why we as human beings want to leave our stamp into the future. That is a way of leaving something about us into the future. It's exactly the same for corporations, that leaders who do not spend time begetting children and in course of time having grandchildren are going to not be able to leave a legacy. They might leave a contribution, of course, but they will not leave a legacy because they have never played a leadership role. And that's the last point we jointly want to make, but I'm making it, that people have to distinguish between leadership and management. And most of us in our early years, as we were growing, and I can speak for Gopal and me, more of me, less of Gopal, because I was more of a manager. I thought I was a leader at times, but I was more of a manager. And I think Gopal was also a meticulous manager, but he started showing signs of leadership faster. And why does this confusion takes place? Why do we use these words interchangeably very often? And the reason is that leaders and managers do the same three things. It's surprising, but they do the same three things. They set direction, they align people, and they ensure that the end results are achieved. Both of them do that. But leaders do it in a different way. Managers do it in a different way. Leaders work for change. Managers work to reduce complexity. You have to do both. As a human being, you cannot just have a brain and not have a heart. One of the things we have told in our book. Similarly, as a human being, as a person in business, you have to be both a leader and a manager. And you have to be able to have the time for the present, quite a lot of that time, but enough time to bring the change that leaders have to bring into the future. So big political leaders and business leaders similarly share the same set of traits. If you think about Mahatma Gandhi, if you think about Roosevelt, if you think about Nelson Mandela, then you find that they had a set of traits that were also shared by great businessmen like Jamshedji Tata or Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or Steve Jobs. And these are that they have a common knowledge of history. They have not a common knowledge, they have a knowledge of history. They have great appreciation of culture. These two things come from the past. They are not even from the present. But they have two things into the future, which is grasp of the present and ambition for the future. Gopal mentioned this thing about ambition. And it is probably a very, very important thing because the theme of our book, Embrace the Future, more than anything else, is about mindset. The ambition you must have to be able to solve the future, take opportunity from it, and reduce the threat. I'm going to stop here. Viju is looking at his watch. He's getting a little impatient about how much time the two authors are taking. So I'll stop here, but of course, very happy to continue with the questions that come from him and from the audience. Thank you.
Thanks, Gopal and Hrishi. Give me a chance to ask a couple of questions. Gopal, you mentioned listening for subsonic sounds. And as we know, many leaders tend to get surrounded with people who don't allow them to listen to the right sounds, right? Whether it's Indira Gandhi calling the 77 election, or I won't go to the recent one, but things like that. So what do you do to actually prevent yourself from being insulated as a leader from getting the right signals?
I think the problem of a leader getting sequestrated from reality is very common. It's not hearing the audible sounds around him is only one. He doesn't see the visible signs around him. He doesn't feel the palpable signs around him. You can go on with a long list. But your question was not why does it happen, but your question was what can you do about it? And I can only share my experience. I'm not a professor, so I can't give you what academic research shows. I found that the best way to see the invisible, to hear the inaudible, and to feel the unpalpable is to keep in contact with the most vulnerable people in your segment. I mean, those of us who are from Hindustan Lever know that the chairman of the company would set aside 7 days in a year, and he would go without an entourage of people, probably one person to assist him with his logistics. And he would sit with the distributor who would tell him all the nice things. And then he'd say, aur bataiye. And then he'd say, aapka maal aata nahi hai, aapka invoicing theek nahi hai, damage claim nahi hota hai, etc., etc. In the book, we have mentioned Lal Bahadur Shastri. Back in the 60s, when the beginning of Varghese Kurian's Operation Flood was there, people went and said, you must go to Lal Bahadur Shastri, who had become Prime Minister, that you must go and see what's Operation Flood going on. That's a fantastic thing this Varghese Kurian is doing. He went. But he said, before that, I want to spend one night incognito with a buffalo farmer in Anand district. They said, this is impossible. How can the Prime Minister go and be incognito? He said, that's my requirement. And indeed he went. Luckily he had a personality which was possible to be pass off as incognito. That's not available skill these days anymore. But he went and spent a night and he had bakri ka roti and chit-chatted, but he was listening more than... And he came back the next day with whatever insights and did whatever happened after that. I mean, India has moved from... All of us, when we raised our kids, know that we had to stand in the queue to get a metal card from RA Milk Colony. And today we are talking of exporting milk. So keeping in touch with the most vulnerable people, to my mind, it's like an electric short circuit, you know. You may be having very high voltage at one end, but you short circuit it and you get the signals.
You want to add anything, Hrishi?
No, I think Gopal is...
How do you communicate during a transformation? Assuming that you're going into an organization and you're trying to create change. If I take an example from the book, Professor Bhattacharya is approached by Mr. Doshi saying that my company is being taken to the cleaners. Please come and help us. So you're going into an exercise to do a transformation. How do you communicate to people in the organization? Because most of the people don't really feel the need for any transformation. They don't want to hear the word probably because they don't want personally to be transformed. They don't want change. So what's the method of communication? Particularly since Gopal, you also mentioned that every transformation has a lot of pain. You want to communicate something, but you don't obviously want to say, hey, get prepared for pain. How do you do that?
Hrishi, do you want to cater or shall I go?
Yeah, go. You start and I'll follow up if needed.
You know, everybody in this room has had experience. And so what I'm telling you is going to be motherhood and apple pie. But you ask the questions, I have to reply to that. When Swami Vivekananda went to Chicago in 1893, the American businessman asked him, Swamiji, what's all this stuff about Vedanta? We are business people, we want to make money. What are the principles of business? And Swami Vivekananda said 4 things, which I'm associating with Vedanta. And unless there's a Vedantic scholar here, it will not be challenged. The first thing he said is, be self-aware. Because your enemy is yourself. And that's the point about arrogance and, you know, being separated from the realities, etc. The second point he made was protect the resources that are helping you to run your business. Now look, there was no ESG in those days. Huh? Protect the resources. He meant people. So he wanted damn good HR. HR people underestimate themselves or the role they can play. That's been my beef about HR people. But I think it's changing gradually. But your resources are not just people. It is air, water, and all the things that gets activists very excited. So that's the second point. The third point he made was serve others before you serve yourself. So we think this is all modern management. And Jim Collins could write a book of 250 pages. We'll pay $20 to buy it. But it's in the Vedanta. But the fourth one, he said, is the answer to your question. The fourth point he mentioned is take your decisions ruthlessly, but implement them with compassion. So nobody wants to hear change. Everybody knows there will be change. When I began my career, I was booed in Ilako House in Calcutta because they said, you're going to come and take away my jobs. Today it could happen if an AI guy went, they will boo him and send him out. But that's not the issue. That may affect you as a young mind. In the book, we have quoted how Tata Steel was modernized. Remember, Jamshed Irani, after liberalization, had to bring down the worker strength from 90,000 to 35,000. I mean, this is unprecedented. But very few people know that that happened, unless you're in and around Jamshedpur. And I've mentioned in the book how he went about it. And that will not be the subject of my response. But one guy got up in the audience and said, Irani साहब आप क्या बात कर रहे हैं? यहाँ पे वसूल है कि हमारे एक बच्चे को काम मिलता है और आप कुछ और बात कर रहे हैं. And you know what Irani told him? He gave him a firm answer, but it was compassionate. He said, पंडित जी, मैं आपकी नौकरी की बात कर रहा हूँ, आपके बच्चे की नौकरी की नहीं. Wake up. That had a dramatic effect because the guy said, you mean my job is at stake? So I think we all do it instinctively. But sometimes we duff it, we want to soften it. You know, you tell him so tangentially that the guy hasn't understood what you're trying to say. But I think when you recognize that speaking truth to power, but doing it in a compassionate way is the skill you have to learn, then I think we all learn it. If you want further details, contact R.R. Nair, who's sitting here.
Viju, I'll just add a couple of sentences to this, if you permit.
Please.
You know, one of the experiences that I've had multiple times when you reach companies who are looking at trouble in front of them, and they engage consultants and so on to say, no, tell us what we should do. And many times they know they have a problem, but they think that the problem is with the organization and their people. And somehow dealing with that is going to solve their problem. That is where organizational transformation subject and way of doing is very often comes about. You think that if you change some people, if you cut some costs, if you trim some factories and so on, your problem will actually go away. And 99% of the time, you do become a little fitter, but your problem probably gets worse. And since R.R. Nair is in the audience, he and I played this out in Lipton, India many years ago, when we had a major problem and we recognized it, and we formed a partnership, but RR was forced initially, not unwillingly, but he was told that you got to come and attend every single business meeting that I was having with my team to understand what the business issues are. And we all the time tried and looked outside the organization saying, our problem is with competition, yes, but even more importantly, our problem is with the customer, because people don't go and buy competition, or competition doesn't kill you, as we said in the book. It's the customer choice that kills you. The customer goes away to competitors. So we started out from there and we said, what does the business have to do outside to be able to be bigger, to be more profitable? And in the process, we had to also do a lot of things internally to cut costs, to change people, to train people, to be able to put a new business model together to save ourselves from a crisis. So this is the ethos, this is the principles, these are the ways that we have tried to put across in our book to be able to explain how to do transformation of the whole business.
Thanks. Both of you mentioned now the role of HR, right? And you also do say that in the book, the importance of partnership between the leader and the head of HR. But for the sake of the audience, why do you think it often doesn't happen? Why do you think the role of HR is often underrated, or the structure itself is often not right in terms of head of HR not being on the table and so on and so forth? Would you like to try?
Shall I start off, Gopal? And I think this happens because leaders and CEOs very often go and assign business problems to functional leaders. And they think that anyone will solve that problem. So if you have a little bit of a margin problem, you have a cash problem, you have this type of problems, you go and consult with the CEO and assign him the task of pulling this up and turning it around. Similarly, if you are having cost-related problems, you probably go to the finance head back again. Similarly, if you have factory issues, Salesforce issues, and others, you go to another functional head, and so on and so forth. You sort of try to solve the business problem, not as a business, but within a silo, within a functional silo, to solve the problem. The great leaders never do that. Great business leaders realize that if they have having problems, there is an external cause. And they form a multifunctional team to try and argue with each other of what our real problems are and how to deal with it. And unless it's not only bringing in HR, I found that if I didn't bring Uday Khanna into my orbit when he was finance director of Lipton, and he did not agree with both RR and me. And similarly, my technical director, if Raghu did not go and say, yes, we have the common set of problems. And if Salil Punus, he's probably sitting in the audience, did not say that, yes, we have a real market problem and anyone cannot solve this problem. So the importance of leadership as a team has to be there. And any transformation work that is handed to HR is a failure transformation project in my book. If the CEO is not taking ownership and his top team of functional leaders is not taking ownership for the business transformation, there'll be 10 more hurdles put on their way than otherwise.
Can I just add I don't want to talk in terms of the standard definitions of HR and organization. So again, I am chairman of a company which is in the lubricant business, Castrol. And traditionally, lubricants have been thought of as the final solution. I put together all the metal parts and please cool it so that the metal parts work. But I inquired as to what is this science called, the science of lubricants. I learned a word called tribology. I don't know how many of you have heard of tribology, but you have been in a lubricants company, so you should know the word. And I said, that sounds sexy, The HR guy is the tribologist in the management team. He should be called CTO, Chief Tribologist. Now, this is nothing to do with tribes. When you want to take, we've now perfected the art or the science of getting metal parts to be lubricated with lube oil. But when you put big data centers, the heat that is generated cannot be cooled. In fact, the limitation to getting more and more density in data centers is the fact that you can't cool it. You make a supercomputer, the cooling requirements are so high. So now lubrication companies are acting as tribologists. Because they're saying in this transformation, I play a fundamental role. I have to devise new coolants which were never required before. And that is what HR is required to do. Over a period of time, they've become the administration guy, the guy who gives you sanctions leave or who says no, becomes unpopular. But that's all behind. If you want to embrace the future, I think my friend Alex Abraham is here, R.R. Nair is here. When we got together to work in Unilever Arabia, when we got together to work in Brook Bond Lipton, he's the HR guy. I would hesitate to say primacy, but it almost looks like that to other people, that this guy is spending so much time with the HR guy. And I've been very lucky. I spent the liberalization years, first 7, 8 years in Hindustan Lever. Then I went to Tata's and I sat and watched how Ratan Tata is doing it. And I've written about it in the book. And there were differences. Obviously, no two people do things the same way. But the role of the tribologist was very, very interesting.
One last very specific thing to the whole transformation process. I assume that when Mr. Doshi comes to you, Professor Bhattacharya, and says that you help me to transform, you're looking at a very time-bound kind of exercise, right? Typically, you want change to happen in a certain amount of time. Do you think that in order to get decisions taken for the change during this period, you need some kind of separate decision-making and governance structure that cuts through the bureaucracy, the normal bureaucracy? Do you need to do things to accelerate the change during a transformation process?
Yeah, let me pick this first because you mentioned Professor Bhattacharya talking to Mr. Doshi. Viju, I feel that the intellectual component of the work, because there is a lot of work which is not intellectual, but intellectual come analytical, come deep thinking, ruminations. That part of the work needs a steady pace and must be completed fairly fast. When I say fairly fast, it could be like a year. Most of my consulting assignments, we do this part of the work in about a year because the consultant makes maybe 3, 4, 5 interventions, and the team within the company works through the year to sort of produce the output that looks transformative, that is going to take the business forward and touch lives of their customers in a different way than they were doing earlier. If the CEO ownership is not there through this 1-year process, I generally resign and I quit because the CEO is not engaging, and no matter how much other lubricants are there in the system, the thrust must be provided by the head of the business. And the understanding of what we need to do and the approval of what we need to do has to be taken by that top team. After that process can be very long, and that is where everyone else gets into the act. They were part of the top team, but now the finance head, the Khannas of the world, the RRs of the world, and everybody else plays their respective roles, which have now got assigned in terms of how we are going to go forward. So sales and marketing takes a renewed role into the external world. HR takes a renewed role both in the internal and the external world, because very often you got to get new qualities of people. You got to bring new talent. You got to bring new knowledge. So those have to be done externally. Training becomes a very important fact. So the whole company now starts working together, but with that lubricant that Ara talked to you about, and the lubricant has been provided by that overall transformative strategy that excites people and says, yes, we got to do this, and we now have a methodology of how to do it. We didn't cover the methodology in the book, but I encourage anyone who buys the book to think about the things that Gopal mentioned when he was talking initially, that change or management into the future requires you to understand societal change, technological change, and business system change. The example given of Mr. Sethi is a profound example of how if someone can grasp and put all the changes that you are seeing into these three boxes, then it becomes easier and more logical to be able to not only compartmentalize the changes, but to see the interactions amongst them and creation of things that don't exist. I won't take the diabetes example just now because of paucity of time, but if the question comes up again from the audience about explain how these three things come into equilibrium, I'll be happy to address that.
The only comment I would add is, in a sense, business leaders, NGO leaders, any leader, political leaders, bureaucratic leaders in government, who are all concerned with change. I mean, none of them has got a static job. Which, he's got to be a allopath and a homeopath at the same time. Allopath means you're defining the problem in finite terms, you got finite solutions, and you want quick action. I call that transactional transformation. Transactional change. I want to cut cost. I want to reduce factories. I want to improve the supply chain. You know, those are transactional. Nothing wrong with it. You better keep doing that all the time. Otherwise, you may not be in business. There's a second kind of change, which requires you to understand the holistic and deal simultaneously with the multiple parts. I'm Mukesh Ambani. I'm running a petroleum company. I want to be a digital company. You've got to give yourself 30 years or maybe more. You can't say, I want this done by September quarter. You want to cut costs, you can try it by September quarter. So fundamental transformational things are evolutionary and not revolutionary. Transactional things can be revolutionary, though you must tread with caution. And I use the allopath, homeopath example to say, you take the introduction of Hindi as a national language in India. I mean, if somebody had got up in 1951 and said, I've got 5 years, who's going to do what? Quarterly, we'll review it. There would be no Hindi. But it took its own roundabout ways. But what service in introducing the national language Amitabh Bachchan and Dilip Kumar and Raj Kapoor have done, chasing pretty girls around trees and singing lovely songs, which we hum even to this day. And my most magical moment was I was in Tiruppundi, which if you're wanting to know where it is, it's on the coastline of Tamil Nadu. And guys were watching Kaun Banega Crorepati. And I asked him in Tamil, I said, do you understand what's going on? What is this? You're watching this. And he said, Yenna sir, when 1 crore is involved, how does it matter what the language is? That is the power and the magic of transformational change.
Okay, let's open it to the audience. Questions, please. There must be mics going around. Who wants to start?
Hi, I really enjoyed the conversation. My name is Karnveer Mundre, and I'm at the cusp of sugar dissolving, and I'm at the cusp of the sugar dissolving and the sugar, because I'm 48, So I really enjoyed your conversation, but this concept of embracing the change, how do you exactly, it's nice to say embrace the change, but I think the recent elections and so many things in the past have told us that what is the change we need to embrace. Sometimes that is a tough question. If we knew what change we had to, or the future, embrace the future. If we knew what the future is right now, for instance, AI, nobody knows. I mean, I was had a conversation. I run a media company, and I was recently in talk with the Google Nordic CEO, and he gave a nice example of Gemini, which is the Google thing. And I said, don't you think later on coffee, when he was off the stage, I said, don't you think this is going to like kill judges and doctors? Because somebody can just give their problem and you'll get a solution. And he says, I have lived my life, but I don't know what my son is going to do. And this is the Google CEO, telling me off the record. So how do you define the future before we embrace it?
Hrishi, shall I go with that
Yeah,
first?
yeah, please, please.
I want to give it at a very practical level. I don't want to go into the ether space. We had a lunch in Bombay House, which we had periodically. Ratan Tata was there. And I'm going back to maybe 2001 or 2002. And in the conversation, he said, I'm giving you his view. Huh? In the future, young people will want to sit down and have coffee and keep sending messages. And we were 4 or 5 of us around the table. We said, what kind of nonsense is this guy talking? He's gone bananas. We didn't tell him that, but we thought so. Why would a guy want to go somewhere else, make a telephone call, sip coffee? But Ratan Tata, one good thing, many good things, but one good thing I'm mentioning in this context, he was our window to the outside world. Like Jamshedji Tata, he was traveling for more than 6 months of the year. Jamshedji Tata did it by steamship, Ratan Tata did it by aeroplane. And he came back and he said, I'm watching this happening in XYZ cities. At that time, none of us could understand, but that was a trigger. And then we started observing and reading. And today you have Starbucks, and people go to Starbucks and pay, I don't know, 10 times as much for coffee as my friend Purnima Jairaj will offer you for a much cheaper price. But she can't provide all the other mumbo jumbo that goes with it, including strange looking croissant with funny things put into it, or even coffee with almonds in it and so on. So this point about not knowing the future is precisely the issue. The solution cannot be that I therefore back off. And I like to think in metaphors, as you might have gathered by now. Embracing your wife is easy. That's the past. But embracing your mistress is tough. Think about it. Don't have a mistress, but just think about it.
Hrishi?
Maybe I skipped this one. I think it has been answered, fully. So I have nothing new.
Yeah. Ben.
Less of a question and more of a reflection, almost a tailpiece to the theme, the theme we are talking about. In change, transformative or otherwise, the intended consequences are in the rational realm. The unintended consequences are in the emotional realm. And I think you brought these 2 points together very well. Thank you.
Thank you. So,
Yes. How would you balance between a thought that we should embrace grit, or we should keep at something and um, keep hammering away at something till you succeed, versus okay, things have changed fundamentally, and we need to stop doing whatever we were doing in the past and change our actions? How would you balance between these?
Hrishi?
Yeah, let me kick off this one. I think there is no break between past and present and future, really. Because yesterday, which was your present, has become already the past. And today is today, and tomorrow is going to be the future. So it is not like they come in blocks. They actually move and transition quite seamlessly from one to the other. And there was a nice phrase which said, tomorrow is the yesterday that I feared today, or something like that, you know. So the thing is that you do not leave the past. You do not sign off from the past, because when you're managing the present, which is extremely important, you are really working with all the data that came from the past, all the history, all the culture, your knowledge of competition, your knowledge of market, your knowledge of technology is what's allowing you, and knowledge of people are the things that are allowing you to manage the present and to do it well. But in the course of the day that has ended now or is about to end, the future has already started emerging. And therefore, the core thing here is the mindset of saying, what am I going to be in 10 years' time? If the CEO is not thinking about that, if his top leadership team and the people in the business are not thinking about, we are this business today, what are we going to be 10 years from now? If this is not a recurrent question often, then you are not going to worry about it. You are going to go and sleep peacefully, and you are also soon going to die. It's only people who are thinking about this continuum and saying, the future is upon us, and can I see it? Because people keep saying, you don't know the future, you can't see the future. So let me give one simple example of how there is so much data in the system today that you can actually see the future. And let me give you finally this diabetes example that I have been offering for the last several minutes. So India is not only the IT capital of the world, it's also the diabetes capital of the world. And there are 10 crore people today who have diabetes, diagnosed as diabetes. And some of them are taking medication, some of them are not, but 10 crore people are diagnosed as having. What is also known, because there is enough data on the subject now, is that the people with pre-diabetes are an equal problem, if not a bigger problem, because there are 14 crore people who have been diagnosed as people going to become diabetic in the imminent future. In the next few years, they are going to move from pre-diabetic to diabetic. Now, I as a businessman now are saying, my God, what a threat to this country. Another businessman is saying, my God, what an opportunity. Because I'm going to create a future where pre-diabetes remains pre-diabetes, or can even go backwards into semi-no diabetes. So how do you pick up now this societal trend that you have picked up? Because the data is there, the knowledge is there, everyone knows this, no one is doing anything about it. They want to attract people into the diabetes market because the pharmaceutical companies then benefit. But this businessman is now saying, I'm going to try and solve the pre-diabetes and leave it there into the future. And he goes searching for technology. And instead of going forward into technology, into artificial intelligence and so on, he goes backwards into Ayurveda, 2000 years old, and starts finding solutions to this problem, that you can leave pre-diabetes people at a pre-diabetes stage with Ayurvedic herbs and medicines that are available. They need to be fine-tuned, they need to be focused back into this problem, and the technology starts evolving. And these two start meeting, the societal need and the technology. The missing link now is the business system, because Ayurveds, people with knowledge in this area, are not available in the large urban towns but diabetes is there in these urban towns because of pace of life, stress, and all of that. So through Zoom, through video calling, through the simple cell phone, through an app, which are all available today, you create a business system by which the patient and the Ayurved never looks at anything except your tongue and checks your pulse, right? So the method of diagnosis is even possible to do. And very soon, the loop is closed. And you have a business that no one is doing today yet in India. But here is an approach by which all the data that is available today helps you to explore a very significant business opportunity into the future. So this is something I leave for you to think about, because there are numerous such examples and could be applied to multiple industries and multiple businesses that exist today.
Gopal, you want to?
No, I think you covered it. I think in a very sort of practical way, you can persist till you have the capacity, but don't ruin yourself. That is a very simple thing. I mean, after the event is over, here's a little story. 1929, young J.R.D. Tata, he was 25 years old, comes with the idea, because of his background growing up in France, of setting up an airline. He goes to his mentor, a Scotsman called Peterson, and said, I want to set up an airline. And he made some note. The then chairman and the board of Tata Sons, and I've seen that minute, said, this is a crazy idea. Who's going to be flying around when there are steamships and trains available? Peterson, being a mentor, said, why don't you let the young man fly? He said it metaphorically, but it turned out to be also literal. And that's how Tata Airlines began, 1929 or 30. Then the story of Air India is known and persisted. Come 1956 or whenever, Air India was nationalized. And some years later, I think it was 1970 or thereabouts, JRD was removed as chairman. And when they asked him, he was in Jamshedpur at that time, and he got a message. There were no cell phones. That, it seems Air India is gone. And when he came back, Air Marshal P.C. Lal came and said, sir, I've been told to take over from you. He said, I feel I've lost a daughter. That daughter, after being misused for the next 50 years, was returned to her original home a few years ago. When I always like to say, in business, you must have niyat, you must have niti, and you must have niyam. Niyat is your intent. Niti is your conduct. And niyam is the rules. But we are trained the other way around. We are trained for niyam. Niti is a bit gray. And we don't discuss niyat, what in business language you would call corporate purpose. So I think if your niyat is right and you have the financial capacity, which Tata's had at that time, to persist, then you made a great airline or a great whatever. But if you don't have that capacity, if we did not have all our companies today firing on all cylinders, I don't think it will be possible for us, for them, I shouldn't keep saying us, to revive Air India. But they've done it because there is a little bit of emotion in business is not a bad thing. Business is not 100% left brain. Some role for the right brain is helpful.
Gopal and Hrishi,
One great thing about this evening is the realization that we don't require to carry two separate books, Michael Porter on one hand and John Cotter on the other. You both have produced a marvelous book. So compliments to both of you, and it has been such a great pleasure listening to your reflections on the book. Couple of observations. One, in the section provided by Gopal, he talks about the fact that transformation is not a one-off intervention. It needs to be rooted and anchored in the corporate culture and sustaining in a consistent way, and making sure that the organization is prepared for dealing with continuous change, I think is something which is being grappled by many in organizational life. So I think if we can actually touch upon how does one go about anchoring the changes in the corporate culture, that would be of interest. And the second one, which is more from the section that Hrishi that you have dealt with, you have made a comment that benchmarking and war games and tools and interventions that are normally used for transforming organizations probably may not be very relevant in the future. And you made some specific reference to the definition of the industry and the rate of change which need to be focused as you look ahead in terms of the desired changes that you want to see. So I think you might wish to amplify with some illustrations if it is possible. I think that would be of interest.
Hrishi, you want to start?
Gopal, you want to start with the first question, or?
You want me to start? I'll start. I don't
Yeah.
want to hog the show because I'm sitting here. That's
No,
the
no,
reason
no.
why.
I think we have fairly evenly shared the discussion and the load of questions. So please go ahead. And
Okay.
we are, I think, coming close. So this is a complex question. I could recognize RR's voice, and in an easy sounding way, he asks very complex questions. So I think you deal with it. If I have a little bit to deal with it at the end, I will.
So, RR, as my former chairman used to tell me, don't answer the question you think I've asked. Please answer the question I have asked. So let me repeat your question. How do you know the effects? I'm putting it in my words to see that I've got the right question. The effects of the transformation that you want to have, and how do you monitor it? Is that your question? How do you keep anchored? Right. So again, I love talking in metaphors because that avoids answering the question directly, and it allows your imagination to fly. We were all in the tea business for some time, and you see a tea bush, it's about that high. And I was very interested in my early days to learn that if you leave it alone, it will, rise very high. So you keep trimming it, and there's a whole science behind it, and that's what constitutes the heart of the tea industry. But the roots of the tree are equally important. So that causes me to go and ask the question, what is the equivalent of the roots of a company? If you can imagine the company as a tree, the roots are its culture. And they're talking to each other. The roots talk to each other. And indeed, the leaves talk to each other. So the reliance on culture building, which is something advocated by people of your background and profession, is the only route that can help you not to fly off the handle. And when I ask myself the question, when this typhoon or hurricane called liberalization 1991 came, as all of us have lived through it, so we know how much debate there was. I was very lucky to be sitting in both places, and I've described in the book how Sushim Datta and Hindustan Lever led with his management team, of which all of you or some of you were part, and how Ratan Tata led it here. And you will find that what is common, because they have their own styles and differences, is both of them looked for a system. In one case, it was a business excellence model. In the other case, it was an emphasis on quality and so on and so forth. And the second thing that they did was they said, what are the non-negotiables in our history and culture that we cannot give up in this change? So the roots go as deep as the tree climbs high. And I think there are many ways in which you can express yourself. I don't know if you're aware, you probably are aware, having been in a food company, that butter and mayonnaise have the same composition. There is oil, there is water. The proportions change. The difference is in the case of butter, the oil is on the outer layer and the water is inside. And in the case of mayonnaise, water is outside and butter is inside. And I liken this to classical music. If you go to a Western orchestra, there's full discipline. You can see there's discipline. 100 people come and sit down, very austere and severe in their countenance. They have a score sheet in front of them and they produce magic. It's a very good demonstration where the outer layer is discipline, the inner layer is creativity. You go to an Indian classical music, 4 or 5 fellows saunter on. It looks like an informal chit chat. And actually, in the music performance, they're chit chatting with each other. They have no score sheet. It looks like it is creativity in the outer layer and discipline in the inner layer, because hours of riyaz has gone in. What the company has to do is to understand whether you put discipline outside, creativity inside, or the opposite. Whether you want butter or you want mayonnaise. It's got to taste good. It's got to be successful. Hindustan Lever chose its way, and many others who have survived have chosen their way. And one of my greatest inspirations, if you leave out short-term politics in India, with which we tend to get obsessed, is the marvelous manner in which India has transformed from the time, about the time many of us were born, to today. Don't get mixed up with the little signals that keep happening every 5 years. Where in the world do you find a country where there are so many people, with so many languages, so many religions, so many points of view? Imperfect democracy, whose democracy is perfect, muddling its way through and trying to re-find its place. I think the Indian transformational story can be, apart from getting inspired by it, which is a privilege that every Indian has, is a great lesson in embracing the future. So I hope I've answered your question.
Hrishi, you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just add just a sentence or two. Um, you know, in our mind today and in what is happening, we see science and technology and buzzwords like AI and so on, and that seems to dominate us. And in the field of management, in the future, the field of strategy, business strategy, there is a lot of emphasis put on doing strategy in a very quantitative way, and using data science and using a lot of data, and data is becoming richer. So there is a bigger tendency to do that. Gopal and I are arguing, why are we arguing the soft science? We are arguing the soft science because no matter what data you use, the validity of the data only brings you to the present. It is only yesterday's data. If you have got it at super speed through AI, it's still yesterday's data, if you want hard data. So past brings you to the present. What brings you to the future? And unless you can demonstrate imagination, so go back to the greatest scientist of all times, probably, Albert Einstein. And he said that the greatest thing about human beings, even bigger than science, is imagination. This is an actual quote. And if you do not have imagination and only have science, you are going to remain stuck in the present. Unless you create the alchemy of science and imagination And both are very important. You got to mix the two, like the mayonnaise or the butter that Gopal was talking about. That makes the new thing, that makes the new product, that makes the new service, makes the new game that consumers get excited about. That requires this soft science. And if we can do it, we succeed. If we can't, we might also succeed, but not in the future.
Thanks very much, Hrishi and Gopal. Wonderful book, wonderful session. Thank you all, everyone. Gopal will be available to sign books which are on sale outside. On your way out, please buy them and get them signed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to thank this audience. You've been fantastic. Rishi has unfortunately missed it, but at least he's virtually got a sense of it. And I see many, many old friends, distinguished professionals. And Biju, thank you very much for getting this off the ground. Thanks.
Me too. I want to thank Viju, and I want to thank the audience for so patiently listening to us. Thank you so much.